All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel and to another interview. Today I have Mr. TruthTeacher2007. Welcome. You are another YouTuber. We've been saying for months we were going to collab. I think since last year. We never got around to doing it, but now that I've been doing interviews, I finally have you on here. So welcome.
Well, I'm glad we could finally make it.
Yeah. Yeah, so for anyone that doesn't know, which at this point, I don't know who doesn't know, but Truth Teacher is a fellow Caribbean. He is Jamaican. So it's been very interesting having you be a part of this little community we got going on.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I came in contact with you was under my ancestry video, the very first one.
Yeah.
And in that video, I said something about how people never guessed that I'm Dominican. I remember you were like, "Girl, you look Dominican." I was like, "Really?" Because people never think that I do. So yeah, that was pretty cool. But so I'm sure a lot of people have seen you commenting on a lot of channels, but I don't know if everyone knows that you actually have a channel yourself. So
Yeah.
do you want to just give us a synopsis or whatever of what your channel is about?
Well, my channel is really about uplifting people of African descent. And the reason why I did that is because, I was active in a lot of other groups off of YouTube. And the one thing I kept noticing is that as soon as people found out that I was a person of African descent, I would start getting attacked. I would start getting a lot of accusations of being, what would they call me? An Afrocentric extremist. And history, world history forums. Then I'd get attacked by the racist trolls saying black people don't have any history. They never created anything. They never contributed anything to civilization. But I guess I really started my channel because it was like, let's see, 2007 to 5, 6. Yeah, it was like 2 years after I had stopped school teaching. And I still had the teacher bug.
Mm-hmm.
And I came across this whole ancient Egypt race controversy happening on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Egypt is a place that I've spent a lot of time in, so I'm very familiar with that. And I was seeing a lot of cross-cultural misunderstanding. And I figured, okay, well, let me make a video to clear up this question, whether or not the Egyptians were African. But then there was also the question, people saying that the people who live in Egypt today are not really Egyptian descent. So I wanted to clear up all these misconceptions, and I made that first video. And like all of us YouTubers, we put our videos out there with lots of good intentions, and then we encounter trolls.
Yes, yes.
And the thing about it is, you expect to get trolled from opposing sides. Like I was expecting like the neo-Nazis to troll me, and I'm ready for that. But when it's your own people, you're like, holy shit, like, like we crazy like that for real? Like, damn,
Well, see how you feel.
Yeah, so that first video, I actually discontinued comments on it for like 2 years because I got one of these like Hotep guys, and he started talking all kinds of mad stuff about, and then he got to a part and said, and when we were on Mars, I was like, oh shit. I was like, clutch my pearls. I was like, this, well, they really think we came from. I was like, okay, you know what? That's it. I turned off the comments and I left my channel alone for 2 years. And I came back, I think, I forgot what my video was the next time I came on, but I kind of came back to that whole topic about, Egypt and its history. And then from there, I started doing like natural hair videos because, for a lot of people, they don't understand the attachment that people of African descent have about our hair. It's like one of the things that people attack us about and make us feel ashamed of ourselves. And so I wanted to, grow my hair out. I'm not going to get into why, but, basically I started growing my hair out because, in short, I couldn't take barbers fucking up my head anymore.
Yes.
But I figured that, I wanted to show people that, we can grow our hair, because at that time there was the myth that, Black people can't grow hair. It's always short. You used to never see like girls with hair, like past their ears. But with the natural hair movement, like people found out how to work with their hair, and then you started seeing girls with hair like all the way down here. It's like, holy shit, like girls that could never grow their hair past their ears before. Now they had like hair down like the middle of their back. I was like, damn. So I wanted to be out there to be an encouragement, to show like, look, everything that they told us about ourselves was a lie. And then I did a few more videos, mostly hair videos. But what I started doing a lot was putting together playlists. And I think that's where right now the bulk of information on my channel is. It's actually in my playlists.
Okay.
Because I go around to videos, and I guess on YouTube I'm very active, like under other people's channels making comments. It's just that it's a hell of a lot easier to initiate dialogue and to make comments than it is to actually sit and edit video. So, so what I would do is I would get together a whole bunch of playlists. And when I'd come across videos where they were trashing African people or people of African descent, I'd be like, here you go, here you go, here you go. So I have videos on, African civilizations. I have videos on achievements of people of African descent. I have videos on African, aspects of African spirituality. I have a ton of like natural hair videos for people talking about Black girls can't grow hair. I'm like, here you go. Well, African Americans, and everybody knows that they're mixed, so it's because of their Caucasian genes. Real Africans can't grow hair. She's Nigerian. She's from Ghana. She's up here. Here you go. Here you go. So the one video that I made that got the most views is the one where I say I'm sick of Kemet.
I remember that video.
So that one's gotten the most hits. And it's not that I don't want to put out videos. It's just that life kind of got turned upside down after that. Like I went back to school full time and to study ultrasound. And then in 2017, my mom had a massive stroke. So I'm going to school and I'm trying to take care of mom and the whole 9 yards. And, we know like my mom passed away last summer, but, that was a whole, so I really didn't have time to make videos, and I'm trying to get back in the groove now. But basically, I would say if you could categorize my channel, my intention is to have enough information out there to uplift people of African descent, whether you be African American, African Caribbean, continental African, Latino, whatever, to show that we do indeed have something of value to offer the world. We do have contributions to make for people that want to say that we're intellectually inferior or whatever.
Yeah.
There's all the information to show you that everything that you've been saying about us everything that we've been told about ourselves is a lie. And beyond the African-centered information, I really want to have my channel be a place where I can just uplift people in general. So that's what I have planned for the growth of my channel. You know, I have things that I think can relate to people no matter, you know, what your background is. Like, for example, I've suffered from depression and anxiety my entire life, you know, and it was undiagnosed, but I kind of, through my own research, realized what was going on with me and was able to find a way to beat it or to control it without having to resort to medication. You know? So I think I have a lot to offer in that area. So yes, the African information is always going to be a central part of my channel, but it's not going to be the only part. So I'm still in my phase, like warrior, you know?
Yeah.
We plan on having new videos. And as a matter of fact, right now, I'm working on a video to teach people how to make their own custom-made filtered masks, you know?
Okay, cool.
That's something along the categories of information that will help everybody. Oh, my other second most watched video is about my tea tree oil mouthwash. So if you haven't seen that video, go check it out. Tea tree is the shit. It's good for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, with all that being said, so throughout the past year, however long that you've been commenting on my videos, like you're another one of my like subscribers, I guess, that I look forward to your comments because although they can be a little lengthy, I appreciate because you're a very knowledgeable person. And I mean, granted, you are a history teacher, so you know your shit, you know? So when people start talking that craziness, like you put them in their place. But I feel like you also, like I told you this before, I feel you have like a very expanded world view. And what is very interesting when it comes to you, and this is something that you've addressed, and you talked about this on your interview with Radical Latino too, is that you don't identify as Black, but you do identify as a person of African descent.
Yeah.
And you also acknowledge that you're mixed, like you don't demonize, I guess, your European ancestry. And I always feel like when it comes to people of our complexion or darker, if you say I'm not Black, people automatically go into, oh, self-hate, self-denial. Oh, you hate your African ancestry or you're trying to run away from it when that's not the case at all, especially with you.
Yeah.
So I guess, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like it's almost like this pressure sometimes to identify as Black based on how you look or whatever.
Yeah.
And then when you go against that, people will look at you real funny, So I don't know, I guess if you want to tell us in your own words why you choose to not identify as Black, but you still identify as being African descent, and you have a lot of respect for African ancestry, but at the same time, you also acknowledge your European ancestry as well. So kind of break that down for us.
Well, here's the thing. When we come out and we say that, we have to acknowledge that there is a reason why people are going to look at us sideways when we say, like, I'm not Black, right? And that is because, we just got to be honest that for a long time, there were a lot of people who would say that because they wanted to distance themselves from quote unquote Black people.
Right.
They distance themselves from their African ancestry because they were ashamed. I mean, we have to be honest about that. We can't deny that that was a thing. And in a lot of places, it still is a thing.
Yeah.
Wherever there was African slavery, you're going to find that dynamic. I mean, you can go to places in sub-Saharan Africa right now where the people are just as dark as chocolate, you know, and they'll tell you, I'm not black, I'm not African, I'm Persian, I'm Arab, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And like, for example, if you go in the Swahili coast, but the Swahili coast was an area that was caught up in the African slave trade to the Middle East for hundreds of years. And what people don't realize is that the Middle Eastern slave trade or the Islamic slave trade started earlier than the transatlantic slave trade, and it lasted longer. So that slave trade lasted right up until the 20th century, like up until the 1960s.
Really?
Yeah. I
didn't know that.
There's some countries where, and I don't remember which one, but there's some countries that didn't outlaw slavery until the 1980s.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's not uncommon to find people who will deny, you know, that African connection. I remember being in, where was I? I was in Turkey, and I met a Black Palestinian. And by Black, what I mean is, you know, dark skin, kinky hair, Palestinian. And I asked him, what is it like to be a Black Palestinian? He goes, oh, I'm not Black. And I'm like, okay. You know? So you do find that, you know, you do find that. I have met people from other places, and it's the same thing. Oh, I'm not Black. I don't know why I'm dark like this. I don't know why my hair is like this. I'm like, like, because you're from, you know, you're of African descent, maybe. Oh no, nobody in my family is. I'm like, so yeah, we do have that. So when I make that statement, I have to be aware of the fact that people are going to look at me sideways, and they have a damn good reason to do so. So I have to clarify. I have to take that extra step and say, look, I'm a person of African descent. And then the next question is, well, ain't that the same thing? And I'm like, no, because no African people identified themselves as Black. First of all, this is Black. You know, we are not Black. Granted, we have some people who may look like they get very close, but we're varying shades of brown. You know, if you see it in a crayon box, you know the difference between the black crayon and the brown crayon. So why the hell are we calling ourselves Black? That's something that people outside of the African continent came up with, you know? You look on the map, there's no such place as Blackistan. There's no Negro land in Africa. So why are we calling ourselves that? I mean, we're the only group of people who get labeled by a color rather than a place of origin. You know, like they'll say Asian people are yellow, but you don't hear them talking about yellow power, yellow. Yeah. You know, they are Asian. They come from a location. We come from a location. We come from people all over, predominantly West Africa, West and Central Africa. So why would I be calling myself a color? As if I don't have a history, if I don't have a place of origin. I do have a place of origin. My ancestors came from a very definite location. Now, having said that, I also have to be truthful of the fact that I'm not 100% African, you know? I am mixed. And, you know, my DNA test came back 75% African, and people were, well, you ain't any different than an African American. I'm like, yeah. And your point is? Because they think that I'm trying to be better than somebody. I'm like, no, I'm just not playing the bullshit game. I'm not playing the game. I do not ascribe to the system of racial categorization because, in my estimation, this was not something that was made for our benefit. This was something that was imposed on us with the express purpose of disenfranchising us. So why am I going to play the game? You know, why am I going to sit here and argue over what box, you know, what oppressive box I should be checking? You know, I'm like, no, I'm not going to play the game. I mean, like, look, if you're going to, you're going to have to beat me over my head and bend me over. Don't expect me to bend over and grease my butthole for you to make it easier. You know?
Yeah, quite the analogy. Yeah.
Play the game. You know, if you're gonna screw me, you're just gonna have to beat me down and do it. I'm not cooperating. And to me, every time you gotta check that box, you're cooperating with a system that is designed to screw you over. And oh, well, this is so we can have, you know, funding. And listen, I'm 53 goddamn years old. Where the fuck is my check? Fucking funding. You know, when am I going to get the good shit? Like, please. I've grown up in substandard neighborhood with a shitty educational system. And then I became a teacher in a shitty educational system where I couldn't even get damn textbooks for my kids. So where's all this good shit that I'm supposed to be getting by checking this box? When is it coming? You know, all I can see with that is like, okay, now we know who to screw. You know, it just makes the job a lot easier for us. So, no, I'm not playing the game, but I do acknowledge my ancestry because I know who my ancestors were. You know, I know who my European ancestors are. And yeah, you do hear people talking about slavery. And okay, we're not going to deny that that stuff actually happened, but yeah, I'm not going to hate myself because of that. Because truth be told, everybody has ancestors in their background who, if you had a choice, you would not be related to. All of our African ancestors were not angels, okay? We all come from somebody, a lot of women, who were forced into arranged marriages that they didn't want to be a part of. Because in most of the world, marriages were not love matches, they were not consensual, they were contractual, you know? So you didn't get married for love, you got married because you needed to continue the family line. This was your obligation, your duty to the family line. And so your parents chose the person that they thought was going to be best for you. And if you were a woman, that could mean that they married you off to some old fart because he was rich and he could provide for you. He's a good match. Love, what's love got to do? Got to do, you know?
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with it. How do you think those women felt?
I can only imagine.
Can you imagine? So we all come from histories of people who did egregious things, dissatisfactory things. Some of our European ancestors were married to people that they didn't want to be married to. Some of our European ancestors were the product of rape because they were from the peasant class and they were serfs on a landlord's, you know, estate. And because he was the landlord, he had rights to any female that was there that he felt like. Or maybe that ancestor was a servant in his palace or whatever, and because she was female and she was below him, he had thought that he had a right to her body. So there was a lot of rape happening. Everybody has a history of somebody who was raped or forced into unions that they did not want to be a part of. So if I'm going to cut off my European side because some European took advantage of one of my African ancestors, well then I got to cut off my African ancestors too, because at some point, one of my African ancestors took advantage of one of my female African ancestors against her will and made her life freaking misery. So we're not defined by the dysfunction of some of our ancestors. The way I look at it is, it took all of that to get me here, and maybe I didn't ask to be here, but I'm going to make the most of it while I am here. So even if that ancestor was a complete pile of crap, you know what? I'm going to be the one that redeems that family line, you know? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to make my time here on earth count. And that's the way we have to look at it, because in my estimation, how are you going to go through life hating a part of yourself?
Yeah.
You know, you may talk all of this, you know, woke shit about, you know, I don't get down with no slave rape and all of this crap, but that's still a part of you, and you hate a part of you. Make that make sense to me. Like, how are you going to be at your absolute best when you hate yourself? So I don't think that we have the luxury of taking on any more negativity than what society and history has already thrown at us. You know?
Yeah. See, for me, my experience, I guess, with identifying as Black, for the most part, it's only been on paper. But I don't know, it's very weird, because I grew up being very aware of my color. Yeah. Like, I knew from very, very young, I'm brown. And I look like these other kids that are also brown, who for the most part were African American. So from that sense, I was always very aware of my color. But in a weird way, it was like not so much my race, because my parents really never talked about race. Like, they honestly never did. That was not a topic of conversation in my house. The only time race was brought up is if they were talking about somebody else that they had some type of interaction with, whether it be positive or negative. Like, if they said, oh, so-and-so happened with, you know, this gringo, I knew they were talking about a white person. Mm-hmm. If they said, oh, such and such happened with a moreno, I knew they were talking about a Black person, Black American. Yeah. Like the gringo, a white American. That's the only time it really ever came up. But I don't know, it's weird, because I feel more comfortable identifying as morena or negra within the Latin context, because I know for us, those labels are more a matter of your color, you know? But I always felt kind of odd identifying as Black within the American context, because for most of my upbringing, that label was more, at least where I grew up, it was more associated with African Americans. Like, I always felt like that was their label. And I know, and you guys, for anyone listening, I'm not saying that that's correct, okay? Like, I've said this before, I know it's not right, okay? That in some places, people only reserve the label Black for African Americans. I know it's not correct, but that's just how I grew up. So I don't know, I always felt kind of weird identifying as Black, even though I would put it on paper. Yeah. But, you know, as I've gotten older, it's like, okay, I mean, I guess, like, you know, based on my appearance, like, you know, I don't have a problem saying that I'm a Black Dominican or a Black Latina, even though some look at me and they're like, well, I mean, but you still can tell that you're mixed, though, like, you're mixed. I'm like, I know, like, I recognize that. But I don't know, sometimes I don't know, should I like identify as Black? Because I've always identified as being Dominican. And it's not because I was trying to distance myself from my Blackness or from my African ancestry. Like, that has never been the case. But yeah, I grew up in a culture where we identify by our culture, by our ethnicity, which is Dominican, you know? Yeah. So I don't know, it's very weird. And, you know, again, some people, they will look at you sideways if you don't identify by race first. But I don't know, it's like you said earlier, these labels, like, what have we benefited from them? If anything, these labels were created to benefit white people, white Americans. It was made, and it's like, and especially when you go into one drop and all that, it was made to benefit their communities, to keep their wealth within their communities, and to keep their communities pure, so to speak. So how have people of African descent benefited from it? Yeah. So I don't know. That's why sometimes I kind of go back and forth with that. And then sometimes I'm like, man, I'm just identifying as Dominican and I'm gonna call it a day. It's just easier. And I don't know. It's like you said earlier, like I also recognize that I'm not 100% African descent. I'm half. And I'm not going to like deny my European ancestry, based on whatever negative things Europeans did in the past. It's like I've said before, I think that we should recognize that, a lot of these negative things did happen. Slavery happened. Like, some of the colonizers, they was on some other bullshit. But at the same time, I don't think that we can paint all of them with that brush. I think especially when it comes to like Latinos, like, and especially those that have very high amounts of European ancestry, which usually points back to a more recent, European ancestor, like they weren't slave owners. Like people totally neglect the fact that a lot of European migrants, poor migrants, came to Latin America post-slavery that had nothing to do with slavery. So I don't know. That's why, I might get on people's nerves because they say that I play both sides or whatever. I don't like to pick a side, but whatever. That's just the reality of the situation. Like, I don't think that you can look at things from only one side because things are never that black and white.
Real life isn't cut and dry and simple.
Exactly.
It's messy and complicated. That's real life. And I think when it's a situation where you actually know those ancestors, you have a different sense of connection, And, but at the same time, I understand where African Americans are coming from, and it took a while for me to figure it out, because even though I was born in the US, I was raised, in my childhood back in the island. And then I came here and I was thrown into this world and I had to figure out, how to make sense of it all. And having learned, what the experience of African Americans was in this country,
yeah,
I understand why they identify the way they do. It's not something that they had a choice in, And furthermore, they had to identify by looks because that could make the difference between life and death for them. You knew that when you saw people that looked like you were safe, and recognizing that the African American community itself is not a monolith, they are mixed. And within the African American community, there's a range of mixture, taking it individual to individual.
Yeah.
People who are categorized as Black, who are actually predominantly European genetically. And then you have people who are damn near 100% African. So it's not a race in the truest sense of the word. It's a spectrum. And the denominator is an ancestry coming from the continent of Africa. But like I said, in order for them to survive, they had to bond together like that. So they can see someone who may be predominantly European, but they can pick out those features and they can know, okay, this person has some African ancestry. And so because of that, they knew, all right, if I'm around this person, okay, I'm safe. I know I can count on this person to help me out, if I'm in a tough spot. Yeah. And that's how they survived. So realizing that, what is reality for everyone? There is no such thing as a universal reality. we live in a world of a multiplicity of realities, but we tend to think that whatever environment we grew up in, that reality is universal.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that African Americans are not the only ones that are guilty of. I mean, I traveled all over the world, and I see that everyone, everywhere you go, people think that their version of reality is universal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, in Egypt, you know, people think the vision of, you know, the gender roles are universal everywhere. So I had a friend that she was living in Egypt for a while, and one day, you know, she's putting up like a cabinet, you know, so she's got her hammer and she's putting up the cabinet. And one of the girls, you know, her neighbor, a little girl, comes in and said, "Miss, what are you doing?" And she says, "I'm putting up a cabinet." And she says, "Oh, you become a man." This is like, "No, I'm not a man, I'm a woman." You know, he said, "Well, only men do that." He said, "Well, I don't have a man, so I have to do it myself." And she said, "You become a man." You know? So their idea of gender roles, they think that it's like that everywhere. And, you know, they're really shocked when they're like, "Oh, you mean you don't do that?" Like, they think that everybody should know. You know, like, this is the way it is. It's just common sense. Everybody should know. So for an African American, when they see somebody from the Caribbean or anywhere else who is obviously of African descent, well, you're Black. I mean, it's just common sense. Everybody should know, you know? And conversely, us in the Caribbean, we have a much looser understanding. Like, we don't have this genetic idea of race so much like in the United States. It's like color is kind of like an adjective.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's how I always kind of experienced it too. Like within Dominicans, like those names or colors, it was more, like you said, an adjective, more based on your appearance,
yeah,
more so than your actual genetics. Like I have they have two cousins, they have the same parents. One is very dark, one is light. Only the dark one gets called negro. The light one, they don't call him negro, you know? So that's kind of that was my experience with that as well.
yeah. You know, and I would go to other countries and I hear them say something like, "Well, I'm white, my sister's Black." And I'm like, what? But they went strictly on, you know, appearance, because one child came out dark and the other came out really light. So that one's white and that one's Black. It's just common sense. Everybody knows this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, us in the Caribbean, it's like, well, no, I'm not Black. You know, that person is Black. I'm not Black. I'm something else. I'm, you know, whatever shade this is, that's what I am, you know. So that's where this, you know, these heads keep, because everybody is convinced that their version of reality is the ultimate, you know, reality. And now I got to convince you that I'm right and you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You Black? No, I'm not Black. I'm mixed. You're wrong, you know. But, you know, it's just weird. And I think a lot of this could be squashed if we just realized, listen, this is what it was in this area and this is what it was in that area. But then, you know, the shit gets crazy because you do get these crazy people that are like, you know, trying to do that, you know. So then it's okay, like our friend, we're not going to mention by name. But, you know, looking the way he does and having a genetic profile that he does, saying the things that he does, you know, so we're not going to mention him by name. We're just going to say that we're doing this video so that we can have a renaissance of understanding
I can't with you.
Amongst cultures.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
But, you know, So it's like, you know, you're trying to tell people, well, no, I'm not like that. I'm not like that. It's not like that. And then here comes this knucklehead. Yes, it's like that. You know, it's like you got a little kid and they're like, Mommy, there's a monster under the bed. Mommy, there's a monster under the bed. And they're like, no, there's no monster under the bed. There's no monster under the bed. And you look under the bed and there's a monster. It's like, shit. You're not helping. You know? But yeah, I mean, hey, real life is messy and complicated. Yeah. But the one thing is like, you know, whatever side you're on, you know, the whole thing is that slavery was not just about the physical circumstances, but it was also psychological.
Yeah.
And so we see a lot of people everywhere where this was a thing, you know, dealing with various levels of psychological trauma around it, you know. And so we have our other friend, who we're not going to name.
Mm-hmm.
How can I say this sarcastically? I can't think of anything. Okay, so I'm going to have to behave myself. But, you know, who has this ideology? And we have to realize that that is a manifestation of this trauma. You know, you don't have to identify any particular way. You might be predominantly European, and that's fine, but why do you have to trash other people?
Exactly.
So, yeah, you know, this individual is predominantly European, and, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think to force somebody to identify, you know, with an idea from another culture, I don't think that's right. Mm-hmm. This person looks like exactly what he is. He's a mixed person. You know, he's predominantly European, but then them African features, you can't get around that shit. You know, so 20% African, and it all landed in the middle of his face. You know, I'm
like that.
I'm just saying. But it is what it is. And, you know, I can understand and respect. This is the majority of me. This is what I feel closest to. Okay, fine. You know, who says you can't be proud of your Spanish ancestry? Why should you be ashamed of it? Yeah. But why do you have to take it that extra step and crap on somebody else? I mean, the crazy thing about it is, even though you're only 20% African, you know, without even one of those African ancestors, you wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
So, maybe, you know, so like, does it make sense? Like, should we go back in time and erase your African ancestors so you could be all white? Well, that sounds good in theory, but like in reality, that wouldn't work out so very good for you because you wouldn't be here. You know, people get the shit twisted when it comes to these DNA videos because, oh, well, it's only 5%. That doesn't count. Yes, it does count. Because your ancestral lineage, it's like a chain. Every link in that chain carries equal weight. So by that same token, you know, as far as my ancestry, it's like I have to be truthful about what my ancestry is. I mean, like, I'm going to look in my father and, like, be talking this shit like 100% black. Like, you see my daddy.
Yeah, I saw the picture. I was like, wow. Yeah.
It was like, so I'm supposed to make believe like he don't exist? Like, for real?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm supposed to make believe that my family doesn't look like what they look like and there's a reason why they look that way? You know, it's ridiculous. So be proud of who you are. Be proud of everything that you are.
Yeah.
And if you say that, well, you know what, I don't know anything about that culture and I feel more closer to this culture, that's legitimate. You know, you have cases of children who were adopted, for example, from other cultures.
Mm-hmm.
They grew up in one particular culture and that's what they identified with, you know? Like I saw a video of this guy, he's half African American and half Iranian. But he grew up in the Iranian culture, you know? So, of course, what does he feel more connected to? He feels more connected to what he grew up in. He grew up in the Iranian culture.
Yeah.
I have a friend, she's half African American and half Filipino. And she grew up in the Filipino culture. What does she feel more connected to? The Filipino culture, because that's what she grew up with, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that plays a really big role, I think, like just the actual culture you're raised in or even raised around. Because I mean, for me, even though I was born and raised in the US, you know, I was raised by Dominican parents who spent a good chunk of their life in DR and then came here. And not to mention, even though there's not a lot of Dominicans in this area, but my family itself is very big. So in that sense, you know, I did grow up around a lot of Dominicans. So that, I mean, that Dominican culture is what I've always identified the most with. But at the same time, growing up, you know, next to other groups, I have always, at least when it comes to like American groups, I have always gravitated more towards African Americans.
Yeah.
So in that way, I don't know if the right word is identify, but I kind of feel more of that cool, whatever, to them than say white Americans, you know?
Like, okay, what's the next closest to what I came from? And it's like, well, it's not a complete match, but it's closer than, you know, that community over there. You know, like there's more things that I can identify with from this group than I can with that group. You know, and that's a matter of where you grew up. You know, I mean, like growing up in Jamaica, for example, I had English friends, like they were born in England. And, you know, white kids, whatever, English, you know, meaning pale skin, straight hair, you know. But they grew up their whole lives, you know, they came to Jamaica when they were like babies and they grew up there. They talk just like, I mean, they were more Jamaican than me. I was like, damn. I'm like, you know.
I always find it so interesting when I see like white people, like straight up white people with like real thick Caribbean accents. That's so interesting to me.
They're there, you know. I mean, you have people who came there and settled, but you have people that have been there for multiple generations.
Yeah.
You know, like one of my favorite YouTubers, the Jamaican comedian is named White Yardie. You know, so he's born in Jamaica, raised in the UK, but he's still like Jamaican, rough around the edges, Jamaican, you know, and he's hilarious, you know. So, but, you know, it's that thing that it's hard for African Americans to understand that you identify more with your country because they grew up in a context where they were a minority in a country that did not embrace them. Because we grew up in a culture where even though there might have been colorism issues and things like that, we were the majority. And we all share a similar culture. You know, they get confused that we would actually feel more connected to a white Jamaican than to an African American who's closer to us racially, but, you know, it's like the cultural connection is there. And So that's a hard one for them to really wrap their heads around. But I think if African Americans were in a situation where they were living in a foreign country, and now they meet an American, even if it was a white American, they would feel that, that sense of identity because there's a familiarity there. So even here in the United States, it's like they think they come from these two different worlds. If you put them in a foreign environment, now they realize just how much in common they have. And so they're going to be that, well, we speak the same language, we come up from, there's things culturally that we can identify with. So, Americans will not get it because they don't know what it's like to have that immigrant experience, I mean, like Malcolm X said it, like he talked about the fact that, when he's overseas, he has no problem with white people. It's only when he's back here,
Same.
There's that, we're both American. We speak the same language. We have the same cultural context. If I say something or a phrase, you'll know what I'm talking about. If I make a certain kind of joke, you'll get the joke,
Yeah. That's very interesting points. I guess it also goes to show, as distinct as both white and Black American groups are, they still have those similarities because at the end of the day, they're still American. But people don't really talk about that. Yeah. So that is kind of an interesting dynamic there. And I could definitely see what you're saying, that if you have two Americans, one white, one Black, in a foreign country, they would find that connection, like you said, that familiarity among themselves, and it'd be like another American that speaks English. That's a very interesting point.
Let me ask you, like in DR, right? When you have an American, whether they're Black or white, do they see them as being, oh, that's a Black American, that's a white American, or do they see them as y'all American?
Well, considering that a lot of people over there call me gringa, I would assume that they kind of see a lot of us maybe just as gringos, like y'all are Americans. I mean, I do think some do make the distinction. Well, of course, that's a white American, that's a Black American, but at the end of the day, we're all gringos to them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's, I don't know, which to that, like that, I always find that so odd because growing up here, I always associated the word gringo with white Americans. Exactly. So going back to the DR and having them call me a gringa, I'd be like, I'm not a gringa, I'm not white. Like, what do you mean? But I had to remind myself, okay, they mean American in general when they say that. So, yeah.
When I got to Jamaica, like hearing the term Yankee, and I was like, yeah, it was like they were talking about me. I'm like, I was like, whoa, why? Because I was born in America.
Yeah.
And when I came back to the United States, I was the coconut.
Yeah.
Jamaica, it's like, so it's like, when you're, and this is why it's like I can identify so much with you because we're kind of in the same boat. We're like first generation, right?
Right.
So there's that that weird space where you're neither fish nor fowl. In America, you're seen as foreign, and then you go back to your homeland and you're still kind of seen as foreign.
Yeah, you're right. Right. Yeah, it's a very interesting duality to what we experience, particularly us that are first generation, because we are in like that middle ground. Yeah, definitely a very interesting experience. Because, I mean, even though I was born here, some Americans would still regard me as foreign, just based on the fact that my ancestry is Dominican.
And then go back there, they can spot, they know who we are. How they can tell, but there's just something about us. They can just smell it. Like they just know.
They know.
They just know.
Mm-hmm.
they know. I don't know, maybe it's the body language. I don't know, but they just always know. And this is something that, I talk to with friends from other countries, and they say, yeah, it's the same thing. They always know. Like, even people who were born in those countries, but maybe they've been here for like 10, 20 years. They're like, yeah, when we go back, they know. Like, there's something that's different.
Right.
They can just tell.
Yeah. Yeah. So being, Jamaican, and like I said earlier, you've been exposed to all of these different like Dominican YouTubers and a few other non-Dominican Latino YouTubers. Like, I don't know, what is your like thoughts on just the crazy things that we kind of go through? Like, I'm sure some of it you may be able to identify with, but like as a non-Hispanic Caribbean person, like, what are your thoughts, or like on the whole Afro-Latino thing? Like, what do you think about that?
Oh, so you mean, how did I slip down this rabbit hole?
Like, how did you get here? What do you like? What are your thoughts on all the craziness that happened in this
shit? Fucking around with them damn DNA videos. That's how I got here. Because for some reason Dominicans make the most DNA videos out of everybody in the Caribbean. So of course you watch the video, and then you go in the comments, and then you see all of this, and so that's how I got into this whole debate over the Afro-Latino thing. And outside of YouTube, in my regular life, how do I describe this? Okay, so my mom came here. She lived in the Bronx. She used to work at, for those of you who know the Bronx, my mom worked at Lincoln Hospital. She worked in serology, and my mom was terrified of driving. So my mom was not going to move anywhere where she couldn't get to work by like a bus or a train. So we lived in the Bronx, and my mom was in a Caribbean cocoon. So there was a lot of contact with people from all over the Caribbean. In the neighborhood where we grew up, where my mom ended up, she was on the Grand Concourse. At that time, it was heavily like 50-50 African-American and Puerto Rican. From that, my mom got involved in the Santeria religion.
Mm-hmm.
And I do know how that happened, but that's a long ass story. Anyway, I mean, like Jamaican, we have our traditional African spirituality practices too. And my mom had always grown up in this ambivalent place where, it's like, we don't really mess with that because we're Christians, but when we need it, okay, we go through everything that we can. Oh, goddamn, okay, this is like, all right, we'll just go ahead and break that glass. Well,
I know exactly what you mean.
So there was always that ambivalence, and, to make a long story short, when my mom was a little girl, she had a situation where she was very sick. And she was bedridden for 3 years. And nothing worked. They took my mom to every hospital, every doctor. They couldn't find anything wrong with her. They took her to every church to get prayers. They even took her to the Catholic Church. Well, the family was Catholic, and then they converted to Pentecostalism. But that's another story. And nothing worked. So finally, one of the maids said to my great-grandmother, "Miss, you're going to make, double kill your daughter. Take her to, this healer."
Mm-hmm.
So they took my mom to the healer. And to make a long story short, they had to do a ceremony. My Pentecostal great-grandmother was like mortified. But she was like, okay, she's going to die. Because my mom actually did die, and they had to resuscitate her. So that was like the final straw. They were like, okay, well, we tried everything, so it's like, okay, I have to try it. They came, and they had to make a parade from where they were all the way on the other side of town to where my great-grandma lived, beating the drums the whole way.
Wow.
So you just blowing it, like Jamaicans, we will do that shit on the DL. Like there was no DL for this. Like your spot was getting blown up big time.
Wow.
But they did whatever they did, and they gave her whatever herbs, medicinal herbs that they did, and it's like my mom got up off the bed.
Wow.
It worked. But the very next day, my great-grandmother moved to a new neighborhood.
I'm not playing with y'all.
Like, okay, we got caught out there, all right. So my mom always had that connection, but there was always that ambivalence that, well, this is a part of our culture, but the Bible says it's wrong.
Yeah.
So my mom was involved, she got involved in the Santeria religion. She was Catholic at this point. And when I came back to New York, I had to stop off in Miami first. And I had to get my initiation. I got my collares and my guerreros, So that was my first connection with the Latino world. They were like, Afro-Cuban, my madrina and my padrino. So, well, actually, something, even before that, before I moved to Jamaica, my next door neighbors were Puerto Rican, and I grew up around them. So I was actually bilingual up until the age of 4 when I moved to Jamaica. So I grew up in an environment where, in one way or another, I was always connected with the Latino community,
Yeah.
And so I want to say like around the 80s, this term started coming up, Afro-Latino. This issue started coming up in the Puerto Rican community. That's where I heard it first, in the Puerto Rican community. Puerto Ricans who were reaffirming their African heritage, their African ancestry, because in the Puerto Rican culture, there was a lot of negativity when it came to aspects of African ancestry. It's like everybody knows it's there, but we don't really talk about it. And we would much rather talk about our Taino side or our Spaniard side, but not so much the African side. But we're still connected to it with our music and our food and our religion. So there's this like schizophrenic relationship. And you had people that were like, you know what? I'm tired of this shit. I'm tired of being made to feel that there's something wrong with me and I'm not as good as, I'm not as intelligent, I'm not as beautiful because, I got kinky hair, because I have African features, whatever. And, the African elements of our culture are real and they are valid and they should be acknowledged and celebrated. So this is when I first started hearing talk like that. And then I want to say like in the 90s and into the 2000s, this is when this term Afro-Latino started coming about. There were a lot of people who were obviously of African descent, mostly, I guess you could like, for want of a better term, people who had very little mixture or no mixture at all. And they were, talking about the fact that they're not represented in the media. And there's this pushback, like people will challenge their Latinidad or their Boricua identity, because, you know, they see them, oh, you look like, you know, an African American. They think I'm African American until I open my mouth and start speaking Spanish. Same thing, I guess, to a certain extent with, you know, Cubans, but in my neighborhood, it was mostly in New York at that time, mostly Puerto Ricans.
Okay.
And then Dominicans started coming up like in the late 70s into the early and mid 80s. And Dominicans at that point, they're just still trying to get used to all of this up here, you know, like still trying to figure out all of this.
Yeah.
And, you know, this question about, you know, racial identity is coming up. And so this is, you know, these discussions about the African part, you know, elements of our ancestry start coming up. And so I can relate to it because even though Jamaica is a predominantly African, you know, country, there is that element of colorism, I guess you want to say.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I'm mixed. I'm from that segment of society. And so, yeah, there is that thing that, you know, when I see the negative criticism that Puerto Ricans and Dominicans will have of their community, you know, around these issues, it's like I relate because it's like, damn, it's like we got the same shit going on. In Jamaica, it's like, you know, for example, you got these beauty contests. It was, I want to say, the first dark-skinned contestant that Jamaica sent. Didn't happen until like the late 60s, early 70s. Before that, every Miss Jamaica was white.
Wow.
You know, so I mean, listen, it's like our motto is out of many, one people, you know. That is true. They are part of us. We are one people, but that's the only one people you want to send to the Miss Universe contest or the Miss World contest, you know. Yeah. It's like, it wasn't until the late 60s, early 70s that they started looking at everybody else and, oh, okay, well, the mixed girls can go and the Indian girl can go and, you know, like the African girl can go, you know. It was like, it was crazy. So we do have that within our society. And, you know, you look at the middle class, for example, and you notice that mixed people are disproportionately represented in that segment of society. It's not that there are no dark-skinned people in the middle and upper classes. They definitely are, but it's like things start getting lighter the more you move uptown, you know? Mm-hmm. It's like you just cannot deny it. And, you know, they'll talk about, you know, like that Jamaica, the real issue is class, not color. And that's true and it's not true. People of mixed heritage had more access to education and certain opportunities that allowed them to create intergenerational wealth. But Jamaica is also very classist because we came out of the English system, and English people are very, very classist. We go to England, I mean, yo, you want to see some ghetto-ass white people? Go to England. Ratchet. I mean, every negative stereotype you want to talk about in the African-American community, you go to England and you see the white counterpart. Listen, anybody out there from the UK or anybody from diaspora that knows anything about the UK will tell you what I'm fucking look, just go on YouTube and look up EastEnders, okay? You know what I'm saying? Yes. Listen, England is not what you think it is. And when Jamaicans started going to England, oh baby, that should blow our minds because, you know, we were used to seeing the upper class English people because we were a colony. So, you know, that's what we thought England was all about. And then we got to England and we got off the boat and we was like, what the? When we saw like the real English people, we was, holy shit. Like,
dang.
Ghetto.
Wow.
We were not prepared for that. What I tell you, we was traumatized. So, you know, we do have this problem in our society too, you know, where people want to identify more with their English side. And you even hear it, like you can tell a person from the upper class just by the way they speak, you know, like just like in England. Damn, we got a lot from them, you know. So it's like you can tell who's from the upper class as versus the lower class, you know, because, well, yes, my dear, and, you know, you hear that accent and you know that this is a person who is coming from the upper class in Jamaica. They're not those boogayaga people downtown, you know. We are prim and we are proper and we are refined, you understand? You know, like,
Oh.
there's, you know, so when it comes to issues of embracing your Africanness, it's like, I want to say a lot of people feel like in order to compensate for being darker skinned, they had to be more British acting, you know?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until we had a very famous person, her name was Louise Bennett, who came around in the 50s and she started working on us to have more appreciation for our folk culture, which is deeply steeped in African traditions, that we started to have a different opinion about it. Like, for example, when I went to school, if you go to school and you start chat patois, Lord Jesus have mercy upon you, because teacher go and lick you. You go and get some big lick. When you're going to school, them going to tell you, you can't chat patois in here, you know. You have to speak proper English. If you go in there and you're speaking listen, back then they could beat the kids. Okay? So if you not speak proper English, you get beat. I remember one time I had like an argument with this girl, and she had something. She was supposed to give me something, and she didn't want to give it to me, so I grabbed it from her, and then we started fighting. So the teacher come, what is going on over here? Teacher, I had this thing, and then him take it and him grab it out of my hand. Now, I was wrong. I was the wrong one, right? You know, I'm the one that's in the wrong. She was right, but she made the mistake. Grab it out of my hand. Teacher was like, grab it out of my hand. Grab it out of my hand. Here comes the king. Put out your hand. She got because using that language, you know. I was, and I did have a filthy mouth as a kid too, so that was part of the problem. I was definitely wrong because I cussed her ass out, and she was like, and you, next time, if I ever hear you using that kind of language, I'm gonna wash your mouth out with soap. You understand? And there were kids that did get their mouth washed out with soap. It was this,
literally?
Yeah, there was this white girl named Natalie. She got her mouth washed out with soap. Because she used to screw with me. And she used to get on my nerves. So I like provoked her so she would cuss me out. And the teacher took a bar of soap.
She's a bad little kid, huh?
Yeah. Oh, Lord. But, so, you know, we definitely had that. So I could understand definitely when Puerto Ricans started talking about, you know, these issues and the hair thing, of course, the good hair, bad hair.
Yeah.
Like, that's a big one for all of us, you know? So I could definitely, yeah, understand that. But, so that was, those people. But then there was always the question, the other people who were not predominantly of African descent. Then the question was, well, what about me? And it was like, well, what about you? So there was that tension there between the people who are predominantly African descent as versus those who weren't. And there was this tension, like, for some reason, the argument always got to this point where it was like it had to be all or nothing, It had to be all of, where the three branches, or it had to be, we're African, like, and I didn't understand why it had to be like these extremes. And I think now, at this juncture in the 21st century, conversation is becoming more nuanced, especially because of the Dominican element coming in, right? Mm-hmm. So I think with Puerto Ricans, they have a slightly different experience, and especially Puerto Ricans raised here in the United States, for multiple generations, they definitely have a different outlook, slightly different outlook. And, but like with the coming of the Dominicans, this issue arose again, because comparing Dominicans to Puerto Ricans, on average, I guess you would say on average, there's a higher percentage of darker skinned people in Dominican Republic as compared to Puerto Rico. And then you get, the whole misunderstanding between I'm not Black, and then, no, it doesn't mean I'm, it's just that I identify by culture. And then you get the fly in the ointment, like our friend, not mentioning any names,
mm-hmm.
Coming around, like speaking that stuff. And, so it's a point where there's a renaissance of opinions regarding this issue. So, for example, your perspective, like you've gone back and forth on it.
Like on the whole, like being Afro or claiming to be Afro-Latino or calling myself that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people have heard me say before, the ones that have been subscribed to me for a little longer, I've kind of had a back and forth relationship with that term. I was aware of Cubans having used that term like back in the day. Like I had heard of them classifying themselves as Afro-Cubans, like the Black ones. But I guess for me, I didn't really start it to like really become a whole thing until, I don't know, within the past decade, I guess. And I mean, like Amara La Negra is one person that really also propelled this into the mainstream as well. And I mean, I remember a lot of people were like, what's an Afro-Latino, And like, I even saw a lot of like African-Americans saying, what's an Afro-Latino, Because some people like to say, oh, it was the African-Americans trying to force us to identify as that, but that's not the case. It's Latinos themselves that started identifying as this. So at first I was kind of like, I don't know. I wasn't really with it. But then, I started listening to the perspective of, self-identified Afro-Latinos and, the whole thing of them having their Latinidad questioned because they looked Black. So people wouldn't think that they were really Latinos. They would think that they were either African-American or whatever else. And just certain little things that I was like, like I can identify with some of the things that they're saying because, I'm a darker skinned Latina, So I kind of started to call myself that at one point, but then, I started thinking to myself, well, am I even like Black enough to call myself that? Like at one point I started questioning that because people were saying to me, well, again, you're only half African. Like you're not, I think the real Afro-Latinos are like, the more unmixed Black people. Cause there are people that have that perspective as well.
Or like yeah.
Am I Black enough to call myself an Afro-Latina? Like, I don't know now. Like, I was starting to like question myself. But then, you know, one thing that I kept hearing was, you know, people thinking that you can't be Black or dark skinned and be a Latino or a Latina. So that's where I guess my perspective kind of changed a little bit, because I was like, where, like, I don't know. I guess some people are just very ignorant to the fact that the majority of the transatlantic slave trade, they were like dropped off in the Caribbean and South America, not the United States. It was what, less than 5% of the slaves that came here. Like the 95% went to the rest of the Americas, you know? So why don't people know that Black people exist? Like, especially in Latin America, like, hello, you know? But I was just kind of like, well, I mean, people should be able to recognize and know that Latinos don't come in just one shade. We don't all look like, I don't know, J-Lo. Like, you know, there are some of us that look more African. There's some of us that look more indigenous, but at the end of the day, we're still Latinos. So that was kind of like where my approach kind of changed, I guess, because I was like, well, people should be able to see me identifying as a Latina, point blank, period, and they don't have to question it. Like, yes, I'm Latina, yes, I'm dark skinned, and what? So that was, I guess, where I kind of changed from calling myself an Afro-Latina to just like, I'm a Latina, period, and I'm dark skinned, and I get over it. But at the end of the day, I mean, like, if somebody else calls me an Afro-Latina, like, I don't take any issue with it. I'm not ashamed of my African ancestry, and I embrace that. And I feel like, especially as a Dominican, you know, like I said before, we are the Spanish-speaking Hispanic country with the most overall African ancestry. Okay, like, we are the Blackest ones. So, and we're not saying every Dominican is Black, but overall, people, overall. So I feel like identifying with that side of ourselves, it's just kind of like, duh, you know. I don't know. That's just my perspective on it, but you know, at the end of the day, like, I respect the movement. I respect people that do choose to identify as that. Now, what I don't necessarily agree with is some of these very like white passing, super light, bright Latinos now I wanted to identify as Afro-Latino. Like, I feel like it's like they're one dropping themselves into it. I don't know if they're doing it because they want to be part of the trend, or they want to seem cool calling themselves an Afro-Latino now, because now it's cool to call yourself that. That's the only thing I don't really agree with, because I feel like, I don't know. I feel like, in a way, when you have people that society would not view as Black calling themselves Black, it kind of erases what the actual Black people are going through, because then they end up becoming like the face of the Black community or whatever. Yeah. So that I don't necessarily agree with. But apart from that, though, that's kind of how I feel about it. So, you know, even though I don't necessarily call myself an Afro-Latina, like I said, I have no issue with the movement. I know a lot of people here on YouTube do not like that term. I got a lot of shit when I called myself that in one video. People was big mad at me. But it is what it is. I know part of that is just due to some Latinos just getting butthurt anytime you mention anything having to do with Blackness or African ancestry. Like, it is what it is. So yeah, that's how I feel about that. You know?
It's interesting because I did the 23andMe, and I did Ancestry also. And Ancestry, you know, they have that part, they show you what island, you know, you migrated, or what area you migrated from. Mm-hmm. For the first time, I saw this term, Afro-Jamaican. And I was like, oh. Like, what? Like, you know, mm-hmm. It kind of caught me off guard. So I can understand now how, like, some Dominicans or Latinos feel when they say Afro. It's like, why is that necessary? You know, like,
I feel like, especially for Dominicans, kind of like, why? Like, most of us have African ancestry anyways, but yeah.
I can understand where both sides are coming from. Like, for example, well, does Monica consider herself Afro-Latino, or? Yeah. Sure. So I can understand that, but like, you know, I was looking through and said, I'm looking at some of my relatives, you know. Some of these people they got only like 12% African, you know, but they're listed as Afro-Jamaican. So it's like,
Wow.
oh, it's like 12% like Afro, really? Like, you know? I mean, I have one relative who's like 5%, you know, and they're listing them as an Afro. It's like anyone who was they were Afro Jamaican. I'm like, it just seemed like weird to me. So I was like, oh, this is what they mean. Okay.
Yeah.
Get it now.
Yeah.
And, you know, the thing is that I really, really detest having these labels because to me it doesn't represent the reality of the real world. Like through 23andMe, I've reconnected with a lost part of, well, two lost parts of my family. I have this relative that came to the United States and passed for white, married a white man, and had another family. So on the DNA, this person popped up as a relative, and I'm looking at the family name, and I'm like, no, can't be. I was like, so I reached out, and this person is only 5% African. But the funny thing is, he has an African maternal line. So you look at this dude, you would never in a million years think that he has any African ancestry at all. He looks like a fucking leprechaun. You know, like, for real.
Dang.
Never think it. So I asked him, you know, was your great-grandmother from Jamaica by any chance? And he was like, I don't know. I don't think so. So he went and he asked like some of his older relatives, and they were like, yes. And he was like, yes, she was from Jamaica, but she wasn't black. And I don't know how I got like 5% African ancestry. And I was like, okay, well, would you like me to tell you? So they've kind of like didn't talk about it, you know? They had eventually like found out that their mother was from Jamaica and she wasn't 100% white. But you know, her daughters never really talked about it. So it's like the grandkids now are finding out because of this DNA test. So, you know, that was the one guy I connected with him. And then through him, we connected with the daughter of one of the daughters of my great-grandmother, like the great-granddaughter, you know, from one of her daughters. And, you know, I sent you the picture, right? When I tell you this woman was the spitting image of my grandmother, like, you know, the same face, same everything, you know, like, damn.
Yeah.
It's like this woman was a little bit lighter, you know, lighter. But she grew up her whole life, you know, with the identity of being a white woman, you know. But she is undeniably related to this black woman, right? So what's really real? You know, when you see something like that, you got to think what's really real. These categories that they're putting down on paper or the family relationship. So to me, I don't get hung up on the label. I mean, even though I don't identify with that term black, if somebody calls me black, I'm not going to fucking lose my mind over it.
Yeah, same here.
But, you know, to me, all of this argument, oh, we need to create more boxes, like why we need to do that shit? It's like, listen, to me, the most important thing is that you recognize who your family is.
Yeah.
And it doesn't match up with these boxes. Come to find out from 23andMe on my dad's side, girl, I got more relatives in Latin America than I actually do in Jamaica.
That's crazy.
I mean, like one of our, okay, so there was the ancestor that came from Africa and he had a bunch of kids and they had a bunch of kids. And one of those kids moved to Chile. He was a boxer. He moved to Chile and had a whole mess. He had like 14 kids.
Wow.
Well, and so they still carried the family name. Girl, there are more people carrying my family name in Chile than they are in Jamaica right now.
Wow. That's
So
insane.
we're on this WhatsApp group. My phone has been blowing up like for the past 3 days, like all day, every day. More
Wow.
people adding to the group, and we're like trying to fit together now like a Zoom conference so we can all like, meet each other. But now I'm gonna really have to learn Spanish because I have
Yeah.
relatives that, they don't speak no English.
Mm.
One of the things we want to do is have a family reunion in Jamaica, but I mean, you look at something like that, I would never in a million years think that I had anything to do with Chile. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
these people, we have the same male haplotype.
Wow.
We carry the same male lineage. And that's the truth. And some of these people, they're like, some of these people, they're like only 12% African, you know? But, very low African percentage, but we're still family. We're still a family.
Yeah.
The reality of our connection goes beyond skin color and all of these barriers that we've created. To me, what's happening with us now, that's what's important, that you recognize your family. So all these arguments over light skin, dark skin, that's some bullshit. But, to talk to the issue that you raised about, lighter skinned people claiming that Afro-Latino label, I have experienced that too. Like, for example, my padrino, he's Puerto Rican. Now, you look at him, he just looks like a regular Puerto Rican, but he identifies as Black. And the reason for that is because his family, his mom's family, they were white Puerto Ricans. They came from the Canarias.
Okay.
So they were white Puerto Ricans, and his mother, she married a Black Puerto Rican.
Yeah.
Like pearls.
Mm-hmm.
And the family was not happy about it at all. So, he grew up and, he says, like his aunts, this one aunt in particular who he refers to as the bitch, he says she never had anything nice to say about him because, I mean, he wasn't really like dark, He just looked like, I guess in Puerto Rico, they call him trigueño.
Yeah.
Got like, that wavy hair. He's got, narrow features and everything. But he was too Black.
Mm-hmm.
And so they made him feel some kind of way about himself because of that African ancestry. So there are a lot of people in these communities who may not be visibly Black, like, like a Celia Cruz or Sammy Sosa before his alteration, But, and we might even consider them light skin or white passing, but they've grown up having negative self-evaluation because of that aspect of their ancestry. They were made to feel like this is something I should be ashamed of. This is something I should hide. This is something that I shouldn't talk about. And they got to a point like, well, to hell with that crap. Why should I be ashamed? That's who I am. That's my lineage. That's my ancestry. Why should I be ashamed of that? And so for people like that, claiming Afro-Latinidad is a way of them learning to love that aspect of themselves that the society they grew up in was telling them that they should be ashamed of. So,
Understand.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, once again, I think we have to just let people identify the way they feel,
Yeah.
have their reasons for identifying the way they do. And, even if it's somebody who's darker that doesn't, okay, you don't feel connected to culturally that African side of you, I mean, that's nothing unusual. I mean, like, listen, in Jamaica right now, there was a discussion of should we decriminalize, traditional African practice. In Jamaica, we call it obia. And, like the parliament is discussing decriminalizing it. When I tell you that there are Jamaicans who are about to lose their fucking mind, like, we're going to legalize obia now? Like, oh no, my dear. I am a Christian, and, like, they are Jamaicans who are about to lose their fucking minds, and because they don't identify, that's those people out there in the bush. We don't do that, There are people in our society who definitely do not identify with the African elements of our culture. It was Louise Bennett who came and started helping us to reevaluate. Like now, if you talk patois in school, it's not a problem. You can talk patois on television. It's like we even say, poems in patois, and, like, we're embracing that part of ourselves, but there's still segments of society that are very resistant. I can understand if, for whatever reason, you do not feel a cultural connection or understanding with that aspect of your culture. But God damn it, can you at least acknowledge that, genetically it's a part of you?
Yeah.
When you look the way you do and your genetic profile is what it is, there's a very big difference between your genetic profile and your cultural, your cultural environment.
Yeah. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
And I think that's why we have, like, we look at that certain individual and we're like, because you look like what you look like, but you're talking all this yang over here. And it's like, okay, why can't you just say, okay, I identify more with European culture than with this thing that I was never raised in, and so I don't really know how to connect to it. That's fine. But why you gotta go, with all that extra shit? Like, that's the part that makes people like, does your mirror have glass? Like, you gotta wonder. But once again, we're all dealing with the trauma of, past history, and some of us deal with it better than others,
Yeah, very true. Well, Truth Teacher, I think I will end our conversation here. It has been great doing this collab with you. Like I said earlier, I'm glad we finally got to do this.
Yeah.
And maybe we can do it again. I mean, there's a lot of things we could talk about, even though we're of different ethnic backgrounds, I think we have a lot more in common than we do differences. Like a lot of things that you've mentioned that happen in Jamaica, it's like things that you wouldn't expect happen in a country that is predominantly African descent. But it just goes to show, like, now we all still deal with a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah.
So it's always great to hear your perspective on stuff. Everyone listening, if you haven't checked out Truth Teacher's channel, definitely go check it out. I will leave the link to your channel in the description box, as well as in my pinned comment that I will leave. So
don't forget to look down in my playlist. I got great stuff there. You will have a renaissance of appreciation for your heritage.
That's awesome. We all need that. All right, Truth Teacher. Once again, thank you. And to everyone watching, thank you. If you made it through this whole video, you're awesome. And yeah, I'll check you guys on next time.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.